They refute ray beams from outer space, but that's not what the book's about.
You're talking about, as someone else asked me earlier, Dr. Wood says maybe there's a beam of laser or microwave from space or something that came down, and she says instead of thermites. Well, I'm saying, look, there's a lot of evidence for thermite. And on the other hand, some exotic laser or maser beam, I'm one that's open to suggestion, but boy, there better be some pretty good evidence, you know. And I haven't, it looks to me like the thermite explanation fits the data quite well, and so that's where I stand on that. But plus the fact that it takes a lot of energy. If you're sending a beam of laser from space, you've got to have an enormous energy source in space to do that. And that's been looked at. It's tough. It's a tough problem. It's almost ruled out there. I don't think we have such a weapon. Thank goodness.
Okay.
I've looked at her site.
We have another question. Here, so you can carry on your conversation with Dr. Jones after the session, and you can debate with him at that point.
Yeah. I do have one quickie, though, on that. She also talks at her site about, look, the calculations need to be done more. But the other thing is the cars, which I talked about, those look very much like thermite for the reasons I explained. But the other thing is the cars, which I talked about, those look very much like thermite for the reasons I explained. She says that's a laser beam hitting things, or a maser. But no, that would not account for the pockmarks in the plastic and the corrosion in the steel like thermite does. So really I think that already the thermite explanation is much better. Plus, she needs an energy source for her high energy weapon and some place where it exists. I'm sorry, we need more data to support that.
Wouldn't you say that being that they're first of all, their objective is just to confuse everybody and to not solve anything? But wouldn't you say that the best advice we can give those people that are attacking this evidence and trying to quash it or confuse everybody, wouldn't you say that the best advice we can give them is to submit their own case in court and let their case be decided by the in the public, in the best interest of the public?
Right. Put your money where your mouth is. If they are so sure that they're correct, why aren't they doing anything about it? You could ask them, who are they protecting?
Who are they protecting?
Why aren't they proceeding with their evidence?
I have an important question to ask you. Is there a reason why AE 9/11 Truth or the 9/11 Scholars or all these other Grand Poobah organizations, is there a reason why they haven't filed in the court system anything about nanothermite?
Well, it comes down to several things. Remember, I said that I filed a request for correction to NIST and became a whistleblower in doing that.
Right.
Because I submitted my evidence to a government agency. And right after that, that was when the AE, about 3.5 weeks after that is when the AE 9/11 Truth's website first went up. After I submitted that request for correction to NIST. And then they submitted theirs, but theirs didn't have anything about thermite in it.
Mm-hmm.
This is a submission to a government agency. And, at the time they were whining that I was an op and so forth. And the evidence shows the reverse because, if you are, it's a felony to defraud the government.
Mm-hmm.
But, you wonder, okay, what are all the reasons you can think of why they wouldn't have anything about thermite in their request for correction to NIST? They basically were saying, you have great data, you just need a little bit more of it. It was pretty benign.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a bunch of, mumbo jumbo. And so why wouldn't they have put thermite in there or molten metal? The two hallmark things that they talk about. And I could only think of 3 reasons. 1, they really don't think it's important. 2, they know it's a crime to defraud the government. Number 3, they know it's treason if done so by someone who works for another government agency, because that's doing psyops on a government agency. That's attacking the government.
Right. So there's a good reason why they don't do this.
Can you think of another reason?
No, I certainly can't. I certainly cannot. Now, you were also through the court proceedings, they attempted to sanction you for bringing a frivolous lawsuit. So essentially, they tried to establish that your lawsuit was bogus. Were they successful in doing that?
The defense did. Right. No, every single time they did that, it was decided in my favor that no, it wasn't a frivolous case.
So it's essential to bring up to the public that at no point in time, and this is per the court's ruling, was your case frivolous or unfounded.
Correct. And there's no defense that the opposition had. They could not defend what I had presented. They refute ray beams from outer space, but that's not what my book's about. Or space beams, because this is what the rumor mill has said. I really think that, with this reliance on the internet, that it's sort of really aiding to the destruction of human thought, because the opinions are ready-made for them that they just can select. A lot of people feel that an opinion and an internet connection make them an expert about whatever belief that they want to select on the internet, as though it's a computer game and you get to pick the outcome. And the outcome is, well, I don't want to, believe that such weapons exist, so I'm going to pick another choice. I'm going to say that firecrackers did it, or that chocolate chip cookies destroyed the buildings. Then I'll feel safe. So it feels like it's a choice, and well, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. I've heard that a lot, or everyone's entitled to their own views. This is not a view. This is not an opinion. The towers basically turned to powder in midair. Most of them did. I'm not saying 100%. That's another thing that the opposition likes to say. Oh, she's saying every single bit of the building turned to dust in midair. No, the majority of the building turned to dust in midair. And that's demonstrated by, all the evidence is consistent with it.
Now, can you define, for those who always, and I hear this all the time, and they call you Judy Woods. First of all, it's Wood. Why is it that they say Judy Woods theory, hypothesis, and they never say evidence? Why is that?
To instill doubt. It's a way of being able to undermine the credibility of evidence. It's a way of denying evidence, marginalizing evidence. And, for example, there were firefighters waiting in knee-deep water right after the event. On 9/11, there was a water main that was broken, and they're wading through it. Yet folks say that it was real hot, molten metal. Did they use their waders to go through the molten metal? It doesn't make sense. They don't stop to think. And if it was molten metal, where's the resolidified big nuggets of solidified metal?
And I have a sample of this molten metal, previously molten metal here. Just a tiny sample. This is really all we need.
I'm not saying there was no liquid metal, but it was not hot, because you'd had steam explosions. You have to look at the evidence. I think we all can remember the paper that was blown all over the place. Why wasn't the paper on fire if it was so hot? And the biggest thing is the 14 survivors in Stairway B, they walked out of there on their own steam. I mean, their own way of getting out of there. They didn't complain about having been cooked to death, come back from the dead having been cooked. No, they were alive.
But then the strangest thing happened. This beam of sunlight came right in on us, like about 8 inches long, but it was clearly sunlight. It was all dirty and full of debris, and it looked like pepper was floating around in it, sort of. But it was sunlight, and I'm like amazed now. It's a 110-story building above us, and I'm looking up at the sun.
And it's another thing. Oh, all went into the basement. Well, they haven't established that. They're just putting that out there as a theory, but that theory is easily omitted, saying, well, did the building fall down, make a detour around those 14 people to get to the basement? How could it fall into the basement and go around those people in Stairway B? So there's a lot of, if you look at the facts, it omits this other, but then that takes away these people's security blanket. If they can't handle what happened, they want to believe that all the material was there, it was just stuffed into the basement, even though there wasn't enough room in the basement to fit the buildings.
I remember during college, I took criminal law. And I remember that there was an order of crime solving, and you know, they discussed forensic science, which is the application of scientific knowledge and a methodology to legal problems and criminal investigations. Isn't this the same way you must treat this crime scene in 9/11?
Very much. It must begin with what happened.
And I wish to extend my thanks to Dr. Judy Wood for taking time out of her schedule for this interview. And on behalf of our ragtag band called DC 9/11 Truth, I welcome you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Dr. Greg Jenkins set up an ambush interview in a side room at the National Press Club, Washington, D.C. Why did Greg Jenkins plan this interview without telling anyone who knows Dr. Wood? Why did he bring at least 2 professional video cameras, recording equipment, special lighting, and a camera crew to the National Press Club that evening and not attend Jim Fetzer's presentation? Jenkins and/or his group tried to talk Dr. Wood out of going to the restroom, saying the interview would only take 2 to 3 minutes. But Dr. Wood felt she couldn't wait. She saw the cameras for the first time after she came back from the restroom. Dr. Wood insisted on switching seats with Greg Jenkins because there were other people in the room who were watching the interview, and Dr. Wood did not wish to be forced to sit with her back to them. The people helping Jenkins felt they needed to change the lighting and camera positions. As you can see in the video, Jenkins is well lit and Dr. Wood is half in shadow for most, if not all, of the interview. They set up their ambush 2 rooms away, out of sight of the Fetzer presentation. It is not clear how they got access to these rooms, as the doors seem to have been locked before they were there. How did Jenkins know Dr. Wood would be there? Who told him? She was a member of the audience on her way to the restroom when they asked her to answer the questions. And why did Jenkins keep his plans of this surprise interview a secret? Why did Greg Jenkins present his ambush interview as if Dr. Wood were the invited speaker at the National Press Club? Dr. Wood had no idea she was going to be interviewed, much less filmed. But she did agree to sit down for 1 or 2 questions on the condition that no permission would be granted until she had authorized the final product. Jenkins did not obtain a notarized signature, and no preview was ever offered by him or anyone connected to him before he posted the video on Google, though he had agreed to do so, sharing an email and a phone number. But both the number and the email address turned out to be fraudulent.
All right, I guess the first question is you have come up with some ideas regarding space-based weapons and the demolition of the World Trade Center towers. And I was wondering if you could give like an overview of the proposed types of weapons that could be used for such a thing.
We haven't really got into listing them yet, just energy weapons.
In what form?
I don't think we even need to define it. What we did was assemble all the pictures, evidence that we trusted, and just going through the evidence, just looking at it, because at that point, what sort of motivated this paper was, wait, we've been told this story, that story, that story. Let's wipe the slate clean and start over. Let's see what evidence we do believe instead of relying on this rumor mill. You know, we're told about molten metal, but nobody's ever seen a picture of these rivers of molten metal. Let's see if we can find any pictures of it. Let's see what we can see. And so I started just looking through pictures and pictures and pictures. What were they telling me? What's the evidence? Okay. And what categories of information? And you start putting these categories of information together, and it starts building in one direction and eliminating various other possibilities.
Okay, okay. Well, I mean, no matter what the beam that is used in the situation, will involve, I guess the term you use is dustification of metal, or I guess another way you could get rid of it.
We're trying to invent a new word.
Yeah, might as well, right? will involve, I guess the term you use is dustification of metal, or I guess another way you could get
We're trying
rid
to
of
invent a new word.
is yeah, might as well, right?
Well, poof, you know.
Yeah, or the vaporization of the metal in the towers, one or the other. Have you done any energy calculations at all to get a scale for what is involved for doing that?
But we don't need to get distracted by those values. If you look at the pictures and look at the scrap pile when it's all done with, is there any question that the building was pulverized?
Well, I do have some questions, but
Is there any question that the building was pulverized?
Well, I do have some questions, but I've come up with an energy scale for the problem. If you use, like, say, a photon beam, a laser beam of some kind, you run into some problems, and namely the amount of energy required to evaporate the steel in the towers is.
Wait, you're specifying evaporation.
Sure.
What about dustification? This is not productive. It's not educational.
It's educational for me.
What's the subject now? Is it steel? Is it concrete? Or is it dust?
You choose, please.
This is a game that you're playing.
I'm really not playing a game.
This is a game that you're playing.
I'm really not playing a game. I'm just trying to figure out what it is you had on your website. I'm just asking questions regarding...
What is your question? Ask
right.
the question, and we stay on that subject through the whole sentence.
Through the whole sentence,
See if you can handle that.
Okay, I'll see if I can handle that. Okay. Let's see. All right. The buildings collapsed in a larger area than their footprint. Would you agree with that statement or not?
No,
No.
they did not collapse.
How big was the debris field?
We covered that already.
Okay. Let's see. All right. The buildings collapsed in a larger area than their footprint. Would you agree with that statement or not?
No,
No.
they did not collapse.
How big was the debris field?
We covered that already.
Anyone, in my view, who denies her research without taking a close look at it is either stupid or they're on the payroll. And that's a bold thing to say, and I wouldn't usually bother to say something like that, but I feel quite strongly about that. And I've seen her interviewed countless times. I've gone over her research, at some length, to say the least. I have seen numerous attempts to debunk this woman, and they fail. And they fail because she is not dealing with anything other than what is there right in front of our eyes.
Really? Really? The people who recommended this book to me, saying that it was the proof that 9/11 was an inside job, either haven't read it or don't live in the real world. Hi there people of the internet, it's me Miles, and about 2 years ago I found myself stranded in New York for an extra day. This was because my flight was cancelled and I couldn't get another one until later on in the day. Now, by this time I'd already been working and travelling for quite some time in America, and I'd ran out of money and I was just knackered. I just wanted to go home. So I thought, you know what, bugger, I'm just going to waste this day. I'm going to walk up to Central Park, have a bit of a sit down and just wait for my plane. But my friend said, aha, today happens to be the 11th anniversary of September 11th. You've got a YouTube channel, why don't you go down to Ground Zero and talk to some of those people there? So I went down there with my little point and click camera and interviewed some people. The footage I got was published over the course of 4 months in a 7-part miniseries, which aimed to tackle and debunk from a scientific perspective some of the more prevalent theories around the 9/11 truth movement. To this day they're still quite popular and a lot of people comment on them still, and one name that keeps coming up over and over and over again is Dr. Judy Wood. At the time of making the series I did a quick Google search, and when I discovered her and her cringeworthy hypothesis about how the Twin Towers collapsed, I laughed and shrugged it off and continued with my miniseries. Now the reason I didn't go after her theories is because they are at the very fringe of what the truther community actually believes. And they don't actually represent the truther community. And I thought, you know what, this is low-hanging fruit. If I go after her, I'm going to be accused of just going after the easy arguments, and I really wanted to stick my teeth into something quite beefy, if that makes any sense. Since then, 2 years have passed, and people still bring up Wood's name in the comment section. What's worse is now I'm accused of being a coward and too afraid to actually go after her theories. But not anymore, because I've got myself a copy of her book, Where Did the Towers Go? Evidence of Directed Free Energy Technology on 9/11. Evidence of Directed Free Energy Technology on 9/11. Yeah, and I gave myself the challenge of reviewing the chapters and the interesting theories it contains.
Why is it that they say Judy Wood's theory, hypothesis, and they never say evidence? Why is that?
To instill doubt. It's a way of being able to undermine the credibility of evidence. It's a way of denying evidence, marginalizing evidence.
But before I start, who is this Dr. Judy Wood, BS, MS, PhD? Dr. Wood is a graduate and former professor of mechanical engineering. Her PhD was in materials engineering science, master's in engineering mechanics, and her bachelor's degree was in civil engineering. She's also an advocate of fair use, which means I'm pretty sure she'll have no problem with me reviewing her book. Now, presumably the reason why she's so pro fair use is that she doesn't own the copyright to any of the images inside this book. Without a doubt, she's highly qualified to talk about the collapse of the Twin Towers.
Look at the cover of my book. What it shows, it's undeniable to anyone who looks at it. The building is just frothing up into dust.
But you wouldn't think that after reading her book. In the first chapter alone, she makes basic mistakes which are inexcusable of someone with her qualifications. Right off the back, the book paints a terrible picture of Judy Wood as not only as an incompetent engineer, but also as a not very nice person. She discusses where she was on September 11th and how she felt when she first saw the Twin Towers being attacked, and she says, "When I saw one of the airplane-shaped holes in one of the buildings, I began to laugh, in spite of all the tragedy of the events, because I was reminded of watching a Roadrunner cartoon."
Something my lawyer explained to me that he learned in law school. When the law's on your side, you talk about the law. When the facts are on your side, you talk about the facts. When neither the law nor the facts are on your side, you talk about something else, anything else.
And if that wasn't bad enough, she found it necessary to include a picture of one of the Twin Towers with almost like a Wile E. Coyote cutout in it. I'm going to go off on a tangent here, but I think it's important to bring this up. Now, as many of you will know, all my videos are based on blog posts on my website. The idea is if they become popular enough, or if they're good enough, they get turned into videos for you lovely people of YouTube. And this one is no different. Unfortunately though, it was DMCA because I used the pictures out of Judy Wood's book. The man who's claiming ownership of the images is a Mr. Thomas Potter, who is not taking action on behalf of Dr. Wood, has a history of DMCA abuse, and in the past has harassed the families of 9/11 victims. Not only did my blog post fall well into fair use, but the book I was taking the images from also was claiming fair use. It just goes to show that if a DMCA like this can be filed and upheld, the DMCA is broken. Also, you've got to love the part in the DMCA where he says, "The offender has a history of DMCA violations," and then links to a blog post saying how I've been illegally censored. I think this kind of shows the calibre of person reading and believing Judy Wood's book. Low blow for the win! But anyway, let's go back to the book. It then abruptly changes direction and begins to talk about the collapse of the Twin Towers.
A 110-story building above us, and I'm looking up at the sun.
And a split second later, I opened up my eyes, and I was just sitting there, totally numb, looking up at blue sky. Then it got dark from the smoke and everything, and I started to cough. I started to feel pain in my leg, and I said, I couldn't even believe at that point that I was alive, and I survived that, and there was nothing above me.
It works out that an object falling at the height of the Twin Towers in a vacuum would take around 9.2 seconds to hit the floor. Then, using seismic data collected by Columbia University, Dr. Wood concludes that both towers collapsed within 10 seconds. This, however, is contradicted by every single video and picture that we have of the collapse. But Dr. Wood ignores this because she says the collapse is hidden in immense dust clouds. and therefore the videos can't be trusted, and there also might be time distortions. While this is true, it doesn't change the fact that they all showed debris detached from the towers falling below the point of collapse. If indeed the towers did collapse at freefall, then the point of collapse should be at the same point or below the falling debris. Unbelievably, Dr. Wood has a quote from NIST practically spelling this out on the same page. NIST estimated the elapsed time for the exterior panels to strike the ground after the collapse initiated in each of the towers to be approximately 11 seconds for World Trade Center 1 and approximately 9 seconds for World Trade Center 2. She also makes an incredibly embarrassing mistake when it comes to interpreting the seismic data. She says here that World Trade Center 2 fell at 10 seconds and World Trade Center 1 fell at 8 seconds. But they didn't. What she was measuring here was actually the seismic activity from debris hitting the floor. At this point, the Twin Towers had already started to collapse. It's incredible. The North Tower began to collapse at 10:28:23, give or take a second, but Dr. Wood misinterprets the peak at 10:28:31 to be the start time. We then see the largest signal around 10:28:36, and this is when the heaviest rubble is hitting the ground, until about 10:28:39, by which time the majority of the debris has fallen. This is where the 8 and 10 seconds come from in her book, and it would take nothing to fact check that, to make sure that's alright. That's incredible! This woman has a PhD, and she made such basic mistakes. My God!
In 2005, a number of reports were issued by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which were the result of a study mandated by Congress to, quote, determine why and how WTC-1 and WTC-2 collapsed, unquote. In April 2007, Dr. Wood, with the help of Connecticut Attorney Jerry Leapart, lodged a qui tam complaint against some of the contractors employed by NIST. This complaint followed an earlier request for correction, an RFC, with regard to the same NIST WTC reports, establishing her as the first to address the fact that this report did not even contain an analysis of the collapse of the WTC. Dr. Wood's original RFC defined how NC Star 1 is, quote, fraudulent and deceptive because it does not address the profound level of destruction of the WTC towers that seem to violate the law of physics. NIST denied Dr. Wood's RFC, admitting they did not analyze the collapse. That is, the spokesperson for NIST admitted that they did not fulfill the mandate by Congress. The title of the report is NIST NC Star 1 Final Report on the Collapse of the World Trade Center Towers. Yet they did not analyze the so-called collapse, or even determine if it actually did collapse. Dr. Wood's subsequent appeal to NIST was also denied, though the qui tam case against some of the contractors that NIST employed went forward. In the original RFC, Dr. Wood stated that, quote, NIST cannot make a statement that the World Trade Center towers came down in free fall, on one hand, and then say that doing so is a form of collapse. Wood also stated that the, quote, use of the descriptive word collapse is incorrect, and points out that according to NIST's own data, their explanation of how the towers were dustified does not satisfy the laws of physics. Dr. Wood uses the word dustify because she has identified a new phenomenon where the building was turned to dust. It was not vaporized by high heat, nor was it smashed by kinetic energy. She concludes from the study that a new type of directed energy weapon was used to destroy most of the WTC buildings. This weapon appears to utilize field effects in its operations, and so is fundamentally different to known types of directed energy weapons such as lasers and masers. Contrary to what Dr. Wood's critics say, her qui tam submissions do not discuss the use of ray beams from space, but they focus on a number of pieces of evidence which indicate the presence of field effects in and around the WTC complex on 9/11. Dr. Wood also points out that the Applied Research Associates, or ARA, one of the defendants in the qui tam action, were one of the contractors for the NC Star reports, and that they are a significant developer and manufacturer of directed energy weapons and or components of same. This, therefore, would be one example of where there was a conflict of interest in producing a truthful report. Dr. Wood's qui tam documents include a study of additional evidence to illustrate NIST's contractors' exhibition of, quote, willful blindness when they produced their part of the NC Star reports. For example, the contractors' own explanations did not address the fact that much of the steel in the towers turned to dust before it reached the ground. Dr. Wood's submissions include a study of some of the effects seen in the aftermath of the WTC destruction, such as anomalous dust effects, anomalous rusting, and anomalous effects seen on some of the surviving WTC steel girders, pictures of which were included in the original NIST documents. The girders are bent and deformed in unusual ways, and because the towers turned to dust, the effects on the girders cannot be explained as being caused by gravity-driven collapse. In Dr. Wood's submission, certain effects on metals and on objects near the WTC are also considered, such as inverted or flipped cars, and cars which are toasted-looking but show damage inconsistent with a hot fire. Dr. Wood's later research has also documented the presence of Hurricane Erin, which was closest to NYC at about 8 a.m. on 9/11.
This is a chart that happened most of the day. It starts right after Tower 2 went away, which was the first tower to go away. I won't say collapse. It went poof, it went away. And then Tower 1, that's its demise. And then all afternoon, there's these quarry blasts that were recorded. If you notice down here, you see this cluster of something happening. That's from the Fox Islands, which is part of the Aleutian Islands. They had a little earthquake up there. But there's a equivalent of 0.6 on the Richter scale for Building 7, which is this little line here. It was a non-seismic event. Building 7 went away and didn't make a seismic event that you could register on this chart. Maybe because controlled demolitions don't register? Well, here's a controlled demolition, the Seattle Kingdom. March 26, 2000. The P wave arrives at the seismic station and the S wave arrives at the seismic station. See how closely spaced that signal is. It takes 4 seconds to drop a bowling ball off the roof of the Kingdom, just to give you relative size. Yet the ground shook for at least 9 seconds in the major part, so at least twice as long instead of less. Here are other signals. There are 5 different recording stations for Building 7. None of them could see an S wave or a P wave. They calculated when it should have arrived. But you can't see anything out of background noise in any of those. And actually, one of those stations, they couldn't even find a surface wave arriving. But you can see ones like this one here, where, again, the 6.4 is the time it takes to drop a bowling ball off the roof. The surface wave lasted for less time. So what's going on here? No S wave, no P wave. Those 2 waves travel through the earth. This didn't slam to the ground. No big building slammed to the ground. Well, let's look at the possibilities. Tower 2 is the first tower to go away. If you turned all but the bottom 16 stories to dust and just dropped a 16-story building to the ground, it would make the seismic signal approximately that was recorded, which was a 2.1. Do the same thing for Tower 1. Dustify all but the bottom 20 stories, and you get the seismic signal that was recorded. Also, across the street from Tower 1, there were some pieces of steel stabbed in the building, but they weren't above the 20th floor. I think the 18th floor was the highest. You remember seeing that dome that didn't get clobbered? That was across the street from there. And Building 7, if you turn all but the bottom 2.5 stories to dust, it would make the seismic signal approximately the same as what was recorded. This is compared to the Seattle Kingdom. The Seattle Kingdom was really just this concrete ring, and it made a 2.3.
In the first 2 chapters, Judy Wood doesn't actually stray too far away from what the truther community actually believe. However, in her 3rd chapter, The Jumpers, she goes full bizarre. In this chapter, we get a glimpse at her quite frankly ludicrous hypothesis, and why the majority of the truther community want nothing to do with her. This chapter revolves around the images of the people who were trapped on top of the World Trade Center and those who fell to their death. Now, to me, nothing more encapsulates the horror of that day than these images. But Dr. Judy Wood sees something very different. She thinks that these people who fell to their death are trying to show us, well, trying to give us a message. She starts off by talking about Richard Drew's The Falling Man picture, which is believed to be the final moments of Jonathan Burley. She then moves on to other images of people falling to their deaths, and begins to say some rather bizarre things indeed. Someone choosing to jump to their death would likely choose to carry something special with them, perhaps a photo of their loved one or even a briefcase or a backpack, yet it's striking that none of the people in these photos appear to be carrying anything, as if they were caught completely by surprise, or perhaps they were on their way from the restroom. Yeah, because if I was in that situation, the one thing that would jump to my mind is, where's my fucking briefcase? And how do you know that they weren't carrying a photo of their loved one? You can't tell that from these really quite low resolution images. I really wanted to stick my teeth into something quite beefy, if that makes any sense. When talking about another image, she says, "Why would someone begin to disrobe before jumping?" The man in the picture Dr. Wood is referring to is not disrobing before jumping. He was having his clothes ripped from him from the sheer force of the air as he fell to his death. Heck, the only reason we know Richard Drew's picture is of Jonathan Burley, who Dr. Wood began the chapter talking about, is that other photographers captured his fall, and his shirt was ripped off, revealing a bright orange t-shirt, which he was known to wear to work. This disrobing theme goes on for quite a while in this chapter, and Dr. Wood believes the reason why people are taking off their clothes is because they've been exposed to some kind of energy beam that's making their clothes uncomfortably hot, so they're having to take them off. I'm not making this up. She later goes on to say that such a field might be produced by the active denial system. This particularly nasty piece of technology, if you ask me, is a non-lethal directed energy weapon developed by the American military. It works by firing a high-powered beam at a target, heating the water and fat molecules in the skin, causing pain. The system was initially deployed in Afghanistan, and it was so big that it had to be mounted on the back of a Humvee, but it never actually saw any service. The system was a public relations nightmare, as well as not being practical for the environment. For example, it had a 16-hour boot-up time, and its potency was significantly decreased when it was raining or snowing or just dusty. This is the first place where Dr. Wood's theory falls apart, because it was very smoky that day in Lower Manhattan, so the effectiveness of such a beam weapon would be incredibly diminished. But let's say such a weapon existed back in 2001, and on a massive scale. What evidence does Judy Wood have that it was used that day? Well, she's talking again about the people taking off their clothes, and she references a Wired article. In the Wired article, it states that damp clothes actually intensify the effectiveness of this kind of beam weapon. However, when you actually read the literature and around this, you can see that it's actually the American military spinning their weapon to be more awesome than it actually is. Having wet clothes would actually partially shield you from the radiation. .4 millimeters of water absorbs around 86% of the power. Eventually the water in your clothes would begin to boil and it'd be more uncomfortable, but in the short run you'll be able to have an increased exposure time. This does not mean, as Dr. Judy Wood implies, that damp clothes somehow attract the radiation. And remember, this only works for areas covered by the damp clothes. Any parts of the target that are exposed will get the full force of the beam weapon, resulting in agonizing pain. If some sort of weapon like that was used on 9/11, the people at the top of the Twin Towers wouldn't be able to withstand it long enough, because they would have their arms and head exposed, for their actual water in their clothes to start heating up. The next problem in her hypothesis is, why would anyone be directing an energy field weapon malarkey that boils water at a building to destroy it? Why would anyone do that? It is true that metallic objects can absorb the radiation given off by this machine, but a study recently found that foil is good enough, household foil is good enough to actually protect you against such a weapon. So we're meant to believe that the Twin Towers were brought down by a machine that can be foiled by foil. So we're meant to believe that the Twin Towers were brought down by a machine that can be foiled by foil. So we're meant to believe
one woman who wrote this book trying to convince everyone that it's space lasers that brought down the World Trade Center.
Foil.
The buildings were not vaporized. Vaporization implies heat.
She thinks that there was this beam weapon pointed at the Twin Towers that somehow vaporized the steel.
The buildings were not vaporized. Vaporization implies heat.
So we're meant to believe that the Twin Towers were brought down by a machine that can be foiled by foil. But let's pretend for a second that this actually happened. Is there any evidence out there that contradicts Dr. Wood's hypothesis that this beam weapon is now heating up part of the Twin Towers?
Also, because of the evidence of lack of high heat, you can eliminate the explanation of some kind of thermal energy weapon as the mechanism of destruction.
Yes, there is. There were many cameras pointed at the Twin Towers that day, and all of them were recording in the visible spectrum. A woman named Carol pointed her infrared camera at the Twin Towers and began recording, and she saw no heat spots above the impact zone. And let's also not forget that the people who were trapped on top of the World Trade Center weren't completely isolated. For a time they had working landline phones and they had mobile phones, and not one of them said, hey, you know what, for some reason my fucking clothes are getting hot.
Also, what was interesting is over here on the Manhattan Bridge, there were some first responders, some EMTs driving towards the World Trade Center. They said you could feel the heat from the bridge. It was so hot from the towers. But paper over here was not burned. How could you feel heat from there? I'll bet she felt something and interpreted as heat. Some kind of energy field, because that's quite a distance away.
So, this final chapter is nothing but fantasy that would make the worst sci-fi movie coming from the asylum blush. It's incredibly bad. So now, let's rate it. Tinfoil hats. A study recently found that foil is good enough, household foil is good enough to actually protect you against such a weapon. So now, let's rate it. Tinfoil hats, which measure how much of a crazy conspiracy this is.
You get people riled up, you stir up their emotions, and they grab their pitchforks, they just want to go get somebody. And you aim at whatever you want to go get. And, that's not how you begin an investigation. You need to first establish what happened before you can even determine who did it. If you don't know what it was, you don't have a crime.
Well, definitely 4 out of 5. This thing is completely nutter butter so far.
One thing quite interesting is that this book has been out for almost a year. No one has been able to refute my book. And there's been a lot of interest in doing so. It's been irrefutable. The only thing they can do is to convince others that it is not what it is. That she talks about ray beams from outer space and lizard monsters from outer space, something bizarre that sounds bizarre.
So that they don't read it. So they keep them away from reading the book. I think more than getting into your information, Dr. Wood, I think what they're doing is preventing people from opening that door. That's simple.
Exactly. Or shading their vision before they telling them what to see before they open the book.
Right. And because so-and-so who's very popular said XYZ, well, because somebody says XYZ, that means it must be true.
The buildings were not vaporized. Vaporization implies heat.
And lastly, we have the hypothesis championed by Dr. Judy Wood, a violent opponent of the nanothermite evidence, who instead insists that the towers were vaporized to dust.
The buildings were not vaporized. Vaporization implies heat.
will involve, I guess the term you use is dustification of metal, or the vaporization of the metal in the towers, one or the other.
The buildings were not vaporized. Vaporization implies heat.
She thinks that there was this beam weapon pointed at the Twin Towers that somehow vaporized the steel.
The buildings were not vaporized. Vaporization implies heat. Also, because of the evidence of lack of high heat, you can eliminate the explanation of some kind of thermal energy weapon as the mechanism of destruction. So that right there eliminates laser beams from space.
Dr. Wood says maybe there's a beam of laser or microwave from space or something that came down and...
So that right there eliminates laser beams from space.
One of Dr. Wood's hypotheses is a space-based weapon powered by free energy, another undocumented and unproven phenomenon. Given the time windows separating each of the destruction events at the World Trade Center, these couldn't have come from a single satellite-based weapon in regular orbit.
And because so-and-so who's very popular said XYZ, well, because somebody says XYZ, that means that must be true. But if you think for yourself and you're an independent thinker, folks, don't be followers. It's what I'm trying to convey to you.
And it's only going to get worse, people. It's only going to get worse. To believe that there's some kind of energy weapon fired at people, making them take their clothes off, and that we have no evidence for that.
They try to equate the evidence as though it's an opinion. And if it's an opinion, then if they discredit the opinion giver or whatever, then that's the way they cover up the evidence. That's why, the book, the way I wrote it, it empowers the reader. It's totally independent of me. The reader reads the book. They understand the evidence firsthand. They take ownership of that information. And so what if I get smeared? That doesn't change the evidence. They could kill me off. Fine. The evidence is still there. Mm-hmm. And that's what needs to get dealt with. And if somebody is distracting away from the evidence, red flag.
Dr. Right. Judy, have you ever written in the book space beams? Ever?
No, nor have I ever used that term.
That this thing exists at all, and that it was, all this kind of jazz I've just been talking about for the last God knows however long. It's just absolutely ludicrous, and you have to be a special tinfoil hat wearing lunatic to believe in it. The bad science is measured in shockermans. Well, to be honest with you, because I've read more and I know where this goes, I'm going to give it a low rating for now, because it is incredibly bad. But it does have a few points in that are kind of, okay, we worked out that at free fall it's 9.2, alright, well done. So that's kind of alright, but still, it's just so shitty with the beam weapon and stuff. So I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. It's still a horrifically bad science. Now next, normally I do Hulk faces. But I've realised they're a bit arbitrary. I mean, you can tell how angry I am by something by just watching one of these videos, so I'm deciding to change my rating system, and instead of doing Hulk faces, I'm going to do Kenny Loggins. Now the logging scales measures how dangerous something is. But my friend said, aha, today happens to be the 11th anniversary of September 11th. You've got a YouTube channel, why don't you go down to Ground Zero and talk to some of those people there? So I went down there with my little point and click camera and interviewed some people. She thinks that there was this beam weapon pointed at the Twin Towers that somehow vaporized the steel So for example, House of Numbers, the AIDS denialist documentary, would get 5 loggings. And this book, well, this is a difficult one. It's probably going to get a very low rating, probably 1 login out of 5, because there is a little bit of danger there, I think. I think if you start to believe in this crap, it's not healthy for you. You can tell how angry I am by something by just watching one of these videos, so I'm deciding to change my rating system, and instead of doing Hulk faces, I'm going to do Kenny Loggins. Now the logging scales measures how dangerous something is. Because there is a little bit of danger there, I think. I think if you start to believe in this crap, it's not healthy for you. So stay away from this book. Which is huge, by the way. It cost £40, which is a lot of money. And on my first glances I just thought it looks like an adult picture book, because it's mostly pictures. It's very well made, but yeah, just stay away from this book, because if you believe in this, it's probably not good for your mental health. Righto people of the internet, that's the end of this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and now it's time for the whoring at the end of the video that I always do. So if you liked it, remember to give me a like and all that kind of jazz, and subscribe if you like me a lot, and share it if you like this video quite a bit, because it really, really, really helps me out. So yeah, I will see you internet when I see you next. Goodbye.
Anyone, in my view, who denies her research without taking a close look at it is either stupid or they're on the payroll. I have seen numerous attempts to debunk this woman, and they fail. And they fail because she is not dealing with anything other than what is there, right in front of our eyes.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It is May 21st, Friday, 2010. I am Jason Burmis, sitting in for Alex Jones. Let's get to the headlines. The two nation when we merge with these, so that's just a completely ludicrous statement. Jeremy in California. Jeremy, you're on the line.
Hey, I actually wanted to make two comments. The first one was actually a guest request. It would be pretty cool if you guys would interview Dr. Judy Wood sometime about her theory on 9/11.
All right, sir, I thank you for the call. Let's go to Carolyn in Florida. It's unbelievable, man. We're talking about real issues here, and people want to talk about the most Johnny nonsense stuff you can possibly imagine. I'm not even going to get into that what that caller wanted to talk about. Carolyn, Florida, you're on the line. Jones, Alex?
Hey, yeah, Watson's coming up with T-News and info. I'm taking off today, and Jason, the reason you're getting so many crazy calls is what I've tried to explain to you. We don't screen phone calls unless it's on a particular subject, and we say we want callers on that subject, so people take advantage of that. That's why I'm pretty much moving to topic-based calls and specific issues, because we now reach so many millions of people that the haters are the ones that are always going to call in first. And what that does is then distort what we're covering. You know, they're going to call in about chupacabras. They're going to call in about space beams. They're going to call in about, you know, saying we're racist, whatever, to throw us off the issue.
We just flown into New York, and we're trying to get down to meet up with our people. We just heard on the cell phone they're being harassed by the police right now. It may already be too late. We'll see what happens when we get there. Alex, hey, everybody, good to see you. Hey, man. Hey, Luke, great to see you, man. We heard from you about an hour ago. Up here. We heard they were threatening to shut you down. What happened?
Yes. They denied the sound permit. They don't want to let us allow a sound permit here. We're going to keep doing it no matter what. And we're going to use our voice no matter what. They can't stop us.
We don't have to thank them for our right to be here and demonstrate. We're Americans! About to go live. We want to jump in basically behind this production.
Send everybody back here when they're going live, we'll go.
Basically guerrilla information warfare.
Anybody want this?
Target of opportunity.
When they go back here, what are you going to say?
We're just going to chant that 9/11 is an inside job. Mainly it's a message to them that we know.
Radio City Music Hall, just a couple of blocks uptown from Fox World headquarters, went into a job as an assistant principal in an Ohio medical school. 9/11 was inside. We're in prayer. 9/11 was an inside job. 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 9/11 was an inside job.
Quiet until they come back to it.
Quiet. And if you hear the shouting, it's a group of demonstrators who've come. 9/11 was an inside job. Oh, get a life. Get a life. 9/11 was an inside job.
Inside job. 9/11 was an inside job. 9/11 was an inside job. 9/11 was an inside job.
Exactly. When we come back, we'll take you into the secret world of restroom gay sex. I think these demonstrators are all into restroom gay sex.
9/11 was an inside job. 9/11 was an inside job. 9/11 was an inside job. 9/11 was an inside job.
Tony in Florida, you have a question on Rand Paul. Welcome. Thank you for holding, sir.
Hi, Alex. Longtime supporter and listener. That wasn't my question, actually, but I have a question. I'll make it brief, and I'll take.
Okay, I'm sorry, because we don't usually screen calls. People have been volunteering what their question is. It says Rand Paul up there.
No, that's a mistake.
Okay. Well, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I'll take the answer off air. I've been a longtime supporter of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. In 2011, I came across the work of an engineer with evidence to the contrary. I assumed at first glance that she was either a kook or COINTELPRO.
Hey, wait a minute.
John Harmon just came on and said you wanted to talk about Rand Paul. Sir, we're not screening your calls. You didn't have to give us a fake story to get on and then come on and say I'm wrong. Did you or did you not tell him that you wanted to talk about Rand Paul?
Yeah, I didn't say you were wrong. I said it was a mistake. I figured I'd get the phone hung up on me. I was just calling to recommend an interview with Dr.
Sir,
Judy
hold
Wood.
on just a minute. Hold on a minute. Sir, we don't screen calls unless I say I want people to call in who are in this town that's on fire or something, or there's a mass shooting on a university. Will you call us? That's the only time. Do you not believe me that we don't screen people's phone calls?
No, sir, and I'll respect that. And
No, I don't care. It just sounds weird. I mean, it says, okay, Rand Paul, if you volunteer it, I'll bring it up. Now, start over with what you wanted to say. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll make it quick, and I'll take the answer off the air. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
I was a supporter of architects and engineers, and I live in truth for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Came across the work of Dr. Judy Wood in her book, Where Did the Towers Go? First, by hearing Jesse Ventura on your show, I believe in 2011, mention her name. Her work is astounding, and the evidence shows that thermal and kinetic means were not employed in the destruction of the World Trade Center complex. Richter scale data is enough in itself. It shows that there were no...
Sure, so what's your question?
If you would have her on, and regardless of where you stand, if you'd have her on and have yourself...
Sure. Let me answer that question. And I appreciate your call. I am the founder of questioning 9/11. I mean, there was NORAD stand down. The hijackers were trained at U.S. bases. That's Sacramento Bee, Associated Press. That means I question there needs to be a real investigation. Bush and Cheney weren't under oath, blah, blah, blah. They then turned that into, Alex says, like Wile E. Coyote, Bush blew up the towers. So then again, they misrepresent. I say, hey, they've got weather weapons. It's on History Channel. That turns into, I say, Obama sent a tornado. So they build straw men around what I've really said about 9/11. I want to go with, hey, they said they blew up Building 7. We have scores of newscasts saying they blew it up. Then they say, don't say that, it's a conspiracy theory, when I have BBC, CNN, you name it, saying it. So I wanted to stick with that. People can debate and argue all day at 9/11 Truth what they think happened. Not Judy Wood, and I've let Ventura come on and promote her. I mean, that's fine. I didn't say anything when he brought it up. I don't know her. I know some of the people associated with her got really vicious towards Stephen Jones, Professor, and other people, and then I got attacked by people saying I was covering up what happened, and I better have people on. So when I'm approached like that, I immediately just go, wow, this is like a weird academic fight, like different schools of Darwinism or something fighting with each other. I've just stayed out of it, okay? And that's basically the end of it. And then I'm attacked everywhere for just sticking to what I think is the most important evidence of prior knowledge and involvement. There's your answer.
When people think you make them think, they will like you. When you really make them think, they will hate you.
Well,
so I'm thinking of why were people attracted to this truth movement? First of all, do you think that those who planned 9/11 just forgot to plan a cover-up? They're going to, leave a paper trail to the front door? Mm. And why are people so easy to manage? And I came to the conclusion, and I've also got the idea from a particular blog by Jack Pelham. It was a beautiful concept, you're using that same quote, that people who recognize that something wasn't right on 9/11, they thought they were clever. And so they joined the truth movement, and they're getting pats in the back. Yeah, you're clever. You figured out the official story is wrong. Aren't you wonderful? But they don't go beyond that because they think they're thinking. Yeah. They're not really thinking.
have a comment and I have a question. And my comment first is I don't know why you guys always in the 9/11 truth movement focus on how it happened and what came to make the buildings go down and everything like that. I think we should focus on who did it. I think it's very important that people focus on who did it. And if you study the 9/11 truth movement and since its conception, there's always been this certain group of people that has been behind everything. You have John Gould that had 9/11 blogger. You had Mike Berg. You had Luke Radowski, Jason Burmis. You had all these players that were trying to control how people perceived
what
was happening in the 9/11 truth movement.
Right. Okay. Do you have a question at all? Yeah, we're familiar with that.
Yeah,
we'll comment on that in a minute.
Yeah. Then if you look at who benefited from it, Larry Silverstein's one of them.
Do you have a question?
Louder.
Do you have a question?
Okay. I guess. What is Judy Wood's perception on who was behind 9/11 and who benefited from 9/11 and all these wars that were precipitated from 9/11? I think that should be the main focus,
if you
not
could,
the buildings.
Okay, Dr. Wood, if you'd like to answer that question. Dr. Judy Wood, by the way, yes.
Yes, I'm not part of the truth movement. I'm a scientist and a researcher. I conduct research and I write reports. That's what I do. And I conducted a comprehensive forensic investigation, the only one in the public domain, about what happened on 9/11. And if you do any kind of investigation of a crime, the first thing you must do is determine what happened. Before you can determine how it happened, you have to determine what it is. And then who did it. You have to define what it is. And once I had done that, I filed my information with NIST as a request for correction, which caused me to be a whistleblower.
Right.
Qualifying as a whistleblower, I was then eligible to file a federal QTAM case, whistleblower case, which I did. And the defendants in that case were companies that were manufacturers and developers of energy weapons.
Right.
And they also had a contract with the U.S. government to know everything about any weapon of mass destruction that exists or is being developed anywhere.
Right.
So not only would they know what weapon it was, but whose weapon it was. And they were going to be put under oath if that case went forward. That's the closest we can get to it.
That's absolutely. I was just going to try and add that, but you got there before me, which is great. And so all of that information is available. It's on the websites if you want to go and read it. You know, we only have a certain amount of evidence, and if you want to stick with the evidence, basically we do not have enough evidence to say who quote unquote did 9/11. We don't have that yet.
But we know who to ask.
Yeah, we know who to ask. We know who's closer to knowing who did it than we are. And they
would have been put under oath if this case had gone forward. And this case was dismissed from court with the judges actually stating in the written decision that they were ignoring the law to dismiss the case.
That's right. And
it was not dismissed on merit.
We've talked about this many times. You can go onto the websites and listen to other audios, and you can discover all of that information is there. That in itself is now evidence of what we've done to try and move this forward. So, and also this involves energy. It involves energy, and that's what we talk about.
Suppressed.
Yes,
yep.
and that is in common with the energy technology that's been suppressed, which could change the world. What we've essentially tried to show, particularly in the last section, that what happened on 9/11 is very much similar to what John Hutchison did is in experiments. But basically, what we're looking at is nuclear effects. We believe that the effects of these weird fires, it's some type of odd nuclear effect, and it's related to something called cold fusion, which should more correctly be termed low energy nuclear reactions. Now, some of you in this room may be familiar with Stephen E. Jones, and he produced this paper a few years ago in 2005 talking about the use of thermite at the World Trade Center. Stephen E. Jones actually worked on cold fusion, and he helped to discredit cold fusion, which is also a nuclear phenomenon. It's an energy phenomenon. And where this is all leading us to is that this is an energy phenomenon which underlies what happened to the World Trade Center. And it's actually energy which we could use instead of all the energy sources that we use at the moment, fossil fuels, nuclear power, and all this sort of thing. Now, some people say, well, Andrew, you're all having this argument about whether it's mini nukes, thermite. That doesn't matter. The only thing we need to do is we need to, agree that the official story of 9/11 is wrong. But everything else outside of that doesn't matter. That's what we've got to convince people of. And I say to them, no, that's not correct, because what we're talking about is free energy that we could use instead of all the destructive sources of energy that we have at the moment. So this is why it's so important. And the other main factor that you've seen tonight is to do with the weather. Now, Dr. Wood would state this a different way to how I state it, but to me, it looks like that Hurricane Erin, was steered or manipulated in some way. And you can see from the data that it went in a straight line for 4 days. So you're either faced with, is that a coincidence or isn't it a coincidence? And at some point, you're going to have to choose which one it is. And I certainly can't say that was a coincidence. So there's something very odd going on with that. So there, just by thinking about that for maybe a few days or a few hours, you've blown apart the whole climate change scam. It's all a scam. And you saw, for example, the levitation effects. This is something that John Hutchison has reproduced as well. So that leads you to the concept of anti-gravity. Somebody able to control the force of gravity. What does that mean? We can have vehicles that we don't need roads. We don't need conventional aerospace technology. All that, somebody in the world, somewhere, has got access to different technology. Okay? So this is huge. It's probably this. There isn't an issue on the planet that this doesn't affect. It's the biggest thing on the planet, and it's needed the biggest cover-up. Very important point I want to make. This is not a theory. Not a theory. It is not a theory. This is what actually happened. What you've seen tonight is what actually happened. It's not a theory. Okay? You go onto the internet. Judy Wood's theory. Judy Wood's hypothesis. It's not a theory. It's a catalogue of evidence which shows you what happened. And by looking at what happened, you can work out what caused it. That's what Dr. Wood said at the beginning. So I just want to remind you all of that. It's very, very important that you realise that. We've got a chance to access this technology and change the world.
Why is the truth movement so afraid of your work, Dr. Wood? And could you take the first answer, please?
Well, it's someone pointed out recently that there's no reason to try to debunk someone unless you have something to lose. Like if you have a particular agenda. If you're in search of the truth, nothing should cause you to be afraid of it. And it is quite puzzling why I seem to be the enemy. And I'm not in the truth movement. I'm not competing with anybody. I'm just looking for the truth. And the truth doesn't have sides. It isn't divisive. If everyone's aiming for the truth, everyone should be on the same page and go in the same direction. So it should be actually unifying instead of divisive.
Indeed. And so what would be the fear factor in their perspective?
I can only guess at a couple of things. One is, it's this agenda that they're taught, and folks, after they're taught something, first impressions stick. They have their emotions invested in it. Once they have their emotions invested in it, they don't want to give it up. They feel like they own it somehow, and it becomes a territorial thing. Or they're involved in the agenda. I think most of the people in the truth movement are just following leaders, playing follow the leader. Mm-hmm. And so it only takes a few leaders
to start steering things astray. And what I like to ask people is, whoever planned 9/11, do you think it just slipped their mind and they forgot to plan a cover-up? Of course they would plan a cover-up. So what would the cover-up look like? There are going to be people asking questions and poking around. What do you do with those people? You round them up and contain them. Keep them out of trouble.
I think that there are a lot of people in the truth movement who are not afraid of her work and who would respond very positively to it. When we talk about the truth movement, I think we have to make a clear distinction between all those people who want to know the truth about 9/11, which includes me and you too as well. Mm-hmm. Everyone wants to know what really happened at 9/11, how it was done, who did it and why, is part of the truth movement. Everyone who acknowledges that the official story of Muslim hijackers is a lie is part of the truth movement. The problem is not with people in the truth movement in general. The problem is with the designated leaders of the truth movement. They're the ones that are very much afraid of Dr. Wood's work. And there are any number of reasons for that being so. I'll just point out two, which I consider to be glaringly obvious. First of all, the evidence that she presents and the case she builds on that evidence for what happened in terms of science at 9/11, at Ground Zero, is irrefutable. Mm-hmm. And they are terrified of her evidence and her argument because they cannot refute it. They cannot, in a fair argument, refute what she says. And her evidence clearly refutes the thermite theory of controlled demolition. So that's one reason why they're afraid. Another reason why they're afraid is because the designated leaders, that would be Gage and Jones, and the people who have clustered around them, have been hideously duped. And either they are pure dupes who've been caught in the psyops of 9/11, or they are accomplices and accessories to that psyops. I couldn't really say. But they're either one or the other. And in that case, they certainly are afraid of anybody or anything who would expose that dupery. And so I think they're not just afraid. I think, if you'll pardon the allusion to this term, they're in terror. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. They have good reason to be. So that's my comment on why they're afraid of Dr. Wood's work.
Indeed. Dr. Wood, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I was looking at some various definitions. In various techniques that they try to cover it up, they don't want anyone to look at my book. My book is pure empirical evidence, and it leads to a conclusion that's conclusive evidence. And so how do you cover that up? You call it a theory. You call it a theory, then you can say, oh, there's no evidence that supports her theories and speculation. They call it theories. It's a favorite one. And I'd like to ask if by theory they mean speculation, because there's no speculation in my work. I build a case on evidence like a detective solving a crime. What I present is conclusive evidence, and being conclusive evidence, it puts an end to the debating by reason of irrefutability. That's what the meaning of the word conclusive is. Serving, by Webster Dictionary, serving to put an end to all debate and questioning. And so if my evidence puts an end to all the debate and questioning, then what can they do with it? The party's over.
That's right. The party's over in terms of speculation, but the real party begins in terms of getting to the truth. And I couldn't agree with you more, Dr. Wood, that truth unifies. When people accuse you of causing division in the 9/11 movement, that is absolutely ridiculous and irrational, and it's slanderous and deceptive, because you have produced pure evidence, and the pure evidence leads us to the truth, and the truth is what we all come together on. So it's 10 years down the road now, and it's time to see if we can come together on 9/11 in the truth and not in speculations and theories. The moment has come to see if we can do that.
One thing I'd like to add is that my definition of truth movement is more of this, group, because of how I've come to know it. I think there's
Sure.
truth seekers, and they're individuals, and they organize. The organization I refer to as the truth movement, but that's a definition difference.
No, I follow
Who knows
that
what it really
distinction.
means?
Right, I follow that distinction there. But there are many truth seekers who are quite willing to look at your work and who are impeded by doing so by the designated leaders of the truth movement.
There's been a lot of, I've kind of casually referred to them as defectors, who are leaving the organized truth movement and realizing they've been duped. They've been led down a blind alley, down a dead-end street.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how cover-ups, I think, work.
That is indeed how cover-ups work, yes.
That's right.
People are led into confusion, and then they're offered false solutions. This is how the PSYOPs operates. There's an enormous PSYOPs around 9/11. And it's beginning to dawn on me now, as I've been paying closer and closer attention to Dr. Wood's work, that on the scientific foundation that she's provided for the evidence of what was done and how it was done, from that foundation, we can start to look at the PSYOPs that was built around it and start to deconstruct and break down the PSYOPs.
So the subtitle of your book is that evidence of directed free energy technology on 9/11. So for some people that might be kind of difficult to understand. What is the connection between the use of this as a weapon, an obvious weapon that took the lives of almost 3,000 people and destroyed, a huge section of New York City, and that connection with free energy used as a positive technology? Could you kind of clarify that connection for us?
Yes, early in the early days of this, I was attacked. Well, I've always been attacked, but I was attacked, and folks would say, "Well, there's not enough energy on the planet. It would take 5 times the Earth's output of energy in order to destroy the towers." Well, why aren't the towers there then? Obviously, that energy came from somewhere. The towers are gone. That's something that is undeniable to anyone. Well, were they there to begin with? Well, I've been up to them. I've touched them in 1976 and 75. So I know that they were there then, and they're not there now. That's a lot of mass to go away. And so we do know that they went away. And you start looking at more of how they went away, it becomes very revealing. As I say, the towers didn't burn up, nor did they slam to the ground. They turned into dust in midair. And I know that because the lack of seismic signal, the lack of appropriate size of debris pile, and the lack of a broken bathtub, which would have allowed Manhattan to be flooded.
And I would just add the vast amount of dust that was created, that was observed.
Exactly. And there's this dust all over the place. But dust came from someplace, and we don't see any, much of any building remnants. So instead of the molecules being attracted to each other, they were repelling each other. That is a change in the molecular basis of matter. I mean, that's affecting that. It's unleashing this unbelievable energy from somewhere. So it's obviously tapped into a way of getting energy, but is often referred to as free energy. And it's my understanding that Nikola Tesla wanted to give the world free energy about 100 years ago, but was afraid to for fear it would fall into the wrong hands and that it would be used for evil purposes. Well, been there, done that. It's happened. So that risk is no longer there. It can be used for good now.
Right, or you could say that the risk that Tesla foresaw, and he should have known, because if we credit him with being a valid scientist who did actually discover this energy, the risk that he foresaw has been demonstrated, okay? And yet there's an enormous irony in that, because in the very fact that the risk of weaponized free energy that Tesla feared has been demonstrated, it also demonstrates that it is real, that free energy as such is a real feasible technology. And so as horrible as it is, as horrible as the events of 9/11 are, they do carry that message. They do declare undeniably to the entire planet that this free energy physics and the technology that goes with it is possible and actually exists today. And so then the responsibility falls on us who want a peaceful world to say, we must claim this. We must claim this for the good of the world and for benevolent uses in society. So the challenge of 9/11 is not merely to find out who did it, to understand the evil behind it, and we must face that challenge, but it's also to open to that fantastic opportunity that it showed us, albeit in a most horrific manner.
We got to the 26th floor, and when the whole building shook, the lights flickered, pretty loud noise. We looked at each other and immediately headed right back in the stairwell, and the lieutenant had said, you know, we're leaving. And as I turned the corner on the third floor landing, the stairwell just erupted into a hurricane. This huge, incredible force of wind and debris actually came up the stairs, knocked my helmet off, knocked me to the ground. It's pitch black, large amounts of dust in the stairwell. So as I was crawling around to start down the next set of stairs, the landing just collapsed underneath me. So I dropped pretty much a full floor. When I finally came to stop, I was hanging from a beam that was in between my legs, and I was probably maybe 4 or 5 feet off the first floor. After maybe, I don't know, 30 or 40 seconds, you could start to hear voices in the stairwell, and tried to open your eyes up, but it was next to impossible. You can only keep your eyes open for maybe 5 or 6 seconds before the dust just forced you to shut them. And but I remember hearing voices. I remember hearing my lieutenant calling for me, asking me where I was. And then at this point, I could also start hearing other firemen in the stairwell. You know, who's there? Who's that? Where are you? And then there was a chief that was still alive for a while. Probably he was alive with us for maybe an hour and a half. And then we really didn't hear anything from him. But it was probably after maybe 3 or 4 hours that enough of the dust settled and everything that one of the guys that was up above us, you know, said he thought he could see the sky. And you know, I remember thinking to myself, I don't know how this guy can see the sky. We're on the second floor of, you know, of a skyscraper. But, you know, he was right. As the dust settled, he was able to see out the top of the stairwell, and he could actually see the sky. And then to see the sight walking out of the stairwell, I mean, it looked like something out of a movie. You know, I couldn't even believe it. You know, unless you were there, you wouldn't really believe it. You know, if you didn't know what was going on, and if you clicked on the TV, you'd probably thought you were watching a science fiction movie and not looking at Lower Manhattan.
Okay, James, sorry. One more time, what is your location? Tower 1, which is the north tower. Airway Venus and Boy. Command post to rescue 1. Okay, 10-4, north tower, Airway Venus and Boy on the second floor.
It's almost hard to believe the sunlight coming, and this is a 110-story building fell down on top of us, and I'm looking at, I'm on the third floor looking at sunlight.
And there is surprisingly so little rubble. Where did all the rubble go?
It's a very good question, Peter, and I have asked some people who've been doing some of the rescue and recovery work this morning. If you look behind me, you can see the very remains, the skeletal remains of the World Trade Center. And one volunteer, Robert Galinsky, explained to me the reason there's so little rubble is that all of it simply fell down into the ground and was cold.
They do not believe that the Twin Towers and World Trade Center 7 were destroyed by fires mean, it's 10 years old. planes in the buildings. Now, the It's still W7 a load of crap. I think it was lots of stuff on the internet, lots of weird conspiracy theories that people believe. You've got to really have a controlled demolition of those lists.
Dave Carrazza, the smoker in charge of the whole cleanup operation there, said to me, I never saw pools or lakes of molten or previously molten steel, neither in subgrade levels nor material that was made
the laser beams but since we dropped the carcass in our ship, not the reason thinking has little to do with it.
My God, Galileo was prosecuted by subjected to an inquisition, prosecuted by the English. Galileo.
Her job, pools under both towers after they collapsed, and Building 7. Now, Building 7 was when the building begins to eject, it never
I hope this is not for real.
They're going to call in about space beams.
Dr. Webb says maybe there's a beam of laser or microwave from space that came down hundreds of feet. She says instead of thermites. Well, I'm saying, look, there's a lot of evidence for that.
If you listen to the evidence carefully enough, it will speak to you and tell you exactly what happened. If you don't know what happened, keep listening to the evidence until you do. The evidence always tells the truth. The key is not to allow yourself to be distracted away from seeing what the evidence is telling you.